myself. But
There
that's
we
all right. I
are.
got the video going. We've
We're
been
here.
recording the podcast portion. We're good on that. It's just I forgot the video
Great.
part. Yeah.
All
So
right.
anyway, we're like halfway through chapter 13, which is about acceptance. And acceptance is, I think, is probably one of the most important law of attraction concepts that there is. So that's what's making this chapter as a take on Neville's view of acceptance to be interesting to me. But um,
Well,
let's just take
I want to pick your brain a little bit then about that.
okay.
When you say that acceptance is one of the most important law of attraction concepts, talk about that for a little bit.
Oh, I think it's really important because I see it as being the positive side of resistance. Because
Okay.
resistance is the thing that we all tend to run into the most often as being the thing holding us back. And I was
Correct.
realizing, as we have done so often, I've tried to flip things around. So I've tried to flip resistance around because resistance is a kind of a negative concept. I was trying to find where's the positive side of that.
Right.
And for me, the positive side is acceptance. So I'm trying to understand and look at the concept of resistance on the flip side now as acceptance, and that's why I'm seeing that as an important concept.
When you think of that word acceptance in this context, in the context of our life and the law of attraction and what we're creating or attracting, do you tend to see that word as relating to our ability to accept what is, or is it our ability to accept in the context of maybe accept something like you accept a gift, like you receive something, or is it Neville is talking about here a version of ourself that unless we're willing to accept it as true? I mean, what comes up for you when you hear that word? I'm curious about it.
Yes. All the things you
All of
just
the above?
underlined.
Okay. Okay. Because you know what it reminded me of? I had a person long time ago. I mean, when I first started my blog, and I'm not even really much of a blogger anymore, but back then in maybe 2008 or 2009,
Hmm.
I can't even remember what I wrote this post on, but a man commented and asked me a question, and he said, "What do you think about acceptance?" And so, we started a conversation about acceptance. And so I think up until that point, I hadn't heard anybody be curious about it, and so it opened
Yeah.
up a really great conversation. But so when you said that, I was like, all right, so what does that mean to you when you say it?
I think more than anything else, it's just that it's not something I had really thought about as an issue for the longest time. And only over the last few years have I realized acceptance is pretty critical. Because unless you can accept something, you're
Hmm.
you're fighting it. You're
Yeah,
resisting it. You're putting up a barrier of some kind.
yeah.
And I've really come to appreciate how important the resistance piece is. So, like I said, I was trying to flip it around and find the positive way of expressing it, and acceptance seems to be the best word for it. Acceptance is one of those things that you listed a few possible ways to look at the word, and they're all good ways to look at it and to understand it. I get the feeling that the more that I dive into the word, the more that I kind of keep it in the forefront of my mind, I end up finding more and more ways to apply it in
Yeah,
life.
yeah.
And that's about as far as I've gotten. I've only been studying it for a couple of years now, so I don't have a whole lot, but that's what I've got so far.
Well, I think I always looked at it as from my point of view, and we've had this discussion a lot, even today with or yesterday when somebody had like instead of a heart or a smiley or a like emoji, what we're used to, somebody had a like an angry face, and we talked about it's like
Oh, right,
what why would somebody be feeling angry? And I'm always the one that's like, it's okay. Like, it's okay
right.
to
Hmm.
be angry. It's all right. It's like, it's a human emotion. There's a reason for it. It's telling you something.
Yeah.
And so part of me says sometimes with acceptance, it's kind of like right there, like accepting our emotions, accepting that we're unhappy in our job, and
Hmm.
accepting that this relationship isn't working for me, accepting that there
Right.
is not enough money right now, whatever it is, just saying, okay, I'm not going to resist it. I'm not going to fight against it. I'm just going to say, it is what it is. And what do I want to create next? So there's
Yes.
that kind of acceptance. But I think
Hmm.
Neville is leading towards can you accept that you already are that which you want to be? Can you accept that you already
That is
have the things you want to have? Because
that is
until
the
you
ultimate
can,
acceptance.
yeah, until you
That
can
is.
accept, and I think he used the word earlier, accept it as truth or
Hmm.
accept it as true. And that's why we're always having this conversation about what is. As people say, but
Right.
that's not true.
Yeah.
That's not true. I am not wealthy. Look at my bank account. See what it says. And Neville is saying,
Yes.
well,
Right.
unless you can accept it as true. So I think it's a very interesting conversation. I
It
went
is.
back, I went to look and see where we left off this morning. And it's going to be necessary, I think, to backtrack just a little bit for
Just to
the next
capture it.
part
Yeah.
make sense and be in context.
Yep.
So he's talking about being completely absorbed in an emotional state. And
Hmm.
he says, you are at that moment assuming the feeling of the state fulfilled, which I thought was
Hmm.
really interesting because we keep talking about assuming the feeling of the wish.
Hmm.
This is where that other meaning of acceptance, I think, can come in. Assuming the feeling of the state fulfilled, whatever state we're in. We may be in
Oh,
a
yes.
frantic, panicky state. And in that moment, when we're absorbed in that emotion, we're assuming the feeling of that state fulfilled.
Hmm. It's
But he
true.
says, if persisted in whatsoever you are intensely emotional about, you will experience in your world. These periods of absorption, of concentrated attention, are the beginnings of the things you harvest. I think we could substitute manifest for harvest if we wanted, right? The
Harvest
beginnings,
also matches his gardening theme too, because he
right,
uses certain
exactly.
themes
And
about
the scriptural thing where he's always talking about using
all the
words
time.
that we would find there.
Yep.
He says it is in such moments that you are exercising your creative power, the only creative power there is. At the end of these periods or moments of absorption, you speed from these imaginative states where you have not been physically to where you were physically an instant ago. In these periods, the imagined state is so real that when you return to the objective world and find that it's not the same as the imagined state, it is an actual shock.
Mm.
You've seen something in imagination with such vividness that you now wonder whether the evidence of your senses can now be believed. And like Keats, you ask, was it a vision or a waking dream? Fled is that music. Do I wake or sleep?
The fact
This,
that he was describing it as what's the exact phrase he used? Imagination with such vividness. The vividness is the part that sticks out to me. It sticks out for a couple reasons. One, because I'm working on that myself. I'm working on the vividness of what it is I'm trying to focus on. Because for me, the vividness means I've got it. I mean, I have totally encompassed it. It's become my entire focus, and nothing is getting in the way of it. And that's a big deal as far as I'm concerned. But also, the way he was wording it here, he was talking about how it's a shock when you come back to focusing on the quote real world unquote. And
right.
I haven't gotten there yet, but I can see how if you can get yourself really, really focused so intently that you're just buying into it completely, when you come back to the real world, it was like, what happened? I don't understand what just happened. Reality just shifted or something.
Well, I like that he actually used this little piece of poetry as a metaphor, and it talks about a waking dream, a dream, because
Mm.
I've had a dream before where I woke up and felt like I was in a bit of a shock because the dream seemed so real
Oh yeah.
that I'm awake now and I'm looking around and I want to shake my head and pinch myself and say, oh my goodness, that was so real. Not every dream I have is like that, but I have had
Oh,
some dreams that were so vivid
oh
that
yeah.
every sense was heightened. And so that kind of clues me in. Yeah, I can't say that I always get there either, not even most of the time. As far as using my imagination to assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled, it's very real. And the ones that I'm doing now are getting to be very vivid, but I still haven't felt the shock coming back into reality. Maybe that's what we're shooting for, right?
Yeah, that gives you your next milestone. That's what that
That's
is.
the next milestone. It's feeling
But I
shocked.
know what you mean because I've also experienced it. Not perhaps you probably sound like it's been a more frequent event for you. For me, the last time I had a dream that was that vivid that I'm not sure I could associate shock with it, but it was really a big step to come back to reality. Was about 10 years ago, right after my dad passed, and I had a dream where I met him in my dream, and that was incredibly real. That was an unbelievably real dream. So that when I woke up, I wasn't so much in shock. It was more like, what just happened? What just happened? That's the thought that kept going through my head. What just happened?
Yeah.
Like I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that actually happened. And it was so intensely real that it didn't feel like a dream. I
Well,
think that's
didn't
what it
you?
was. It felt different from a dream. Most dream, because I associate dreams as being like, these little flighty things that kind of float through your head, and you may remember them, you may not. It wasn't like that at all.
But didn't you tell me that in that dream that you hugged your dad
Yes. Oh
and
yeah.
that you could feel your dad hugging you?
Yes.
And see, that's in my memory of dreams that have been that vivid. The other senses have been involved. Like I smelled something or tasted something
Hmm.
or hugged someone, or felt something that when I
Hmm.
woke up, it was like no. Do I still smell it? I mean, one time I smelled roses, and it was so intense. When I woke up, I kept like, oh my goodness, looking around like I smell
Hmm.
roses. And
Right.
that right there is that sense of a little bit of shock. It's like
Okay.
a shock
Yeah.
to the
Okay. I'll buy
system.
that.
It's like, but
Yeah.
I felt this. I felt it in a tangible way. I tasted it. I smelled it, whatever. And so I think that's why I think that's where he is driving us to get to the place where all of those senses are so vivid that it actually feels like a shock that we're not feeling that when we come out of our reverie, I guess you want to call it. I don't know what
Right.
to call it. Our imagination, our scene. He says
Well,
this shock.
before you go on, before you read the rest of that paragraph, I've got to interrupt because we're getting some nice commentary here, and we actually have a
Oh, good.
question. And the
Oh, good.
question, I
Yay.
think actually, the question ties in, I think, with what we're talking about,
Okay,
although I don't
perfect.
think that was her intention. But Elisha asks, how can you accept something you're struggling with?
Okay. So I want to tell you a little story about something that I don't know if this will be how helpful it will be, but a couple of years ago, I was really struggling with something,
Hmm.
and it was just a huge struggle. I couldn't think about anything else, really a struggle. And one day, and I don't know what really got me here, but at that point I said, you know what? I am not going to struggle against this anymore. It is what it is. I'm going to accept it. And like it felt so good and so freeing. And I just felt amazing. Nothing had changed. I just decided, you know what? It is what it is. I'm just going to fight it. I'm not going to try to change it. I'm just going to accept it. I'm going to
Hmm.
just walk in acceptance. And I just felt like a rock star. And then, like 5 seconds later or 2 seconds, I didn't hear an audible voice, but my higher self, this little voice, I said, I totally accept this. And this little voice said, can you love it?
Oh.
And I was like, oh man, I actually said out loud, are you kidding me? I'm like, I thought I was really rocking it by accepting this. You want me to love it? Love it. I felt like my higher self is kicking my ass today. Okay, you can love it. Whew. But you know what? That was it. And in that moment, after I had the small little temper tantrum of what, um, I started laughing and I said, you know what? Yes, I can love it because it's part of my life. It's going to be part of my story.
Mm.
And it's going to be an amazing story with a huge victory at the end of it. So
Yeah.
yeah, I can accept it and I think I can love it. I can just choose to love it. There's a book, a famous book, um, called Loving What Is by Byron Katie.
Hmm.
And, that's what came to mind at that moment when that happened. But so I think that's how you do it. I think the how is just in choosing to. It's just a choice. It's a
Yeah, well, it
conscious
is.
choice, right?
I love the way your higher Cindie came in though and made you go to the next level. I love that part. That was great.
Man, So you said we had some other good commentary too. What are we getting?
Oh, all kinds of stuff. Well, first of all, Elisha was very happy that I pronounced her name right, and I have to admit, Elisha, it was a guess. I just kind of said it's going to be Elisa or Elisha. I'm going with Elisha, and it worked. So, I guess that was my higher Walt saying go that way.
Excellent.
And we've got hellos from Nasha and from Bronwyn and from Jeffrey and let's see, comments like, yes, because you actually met your father, Nasha says. His perfume, the smell of his skin. I don't think my dad actually wore perfume, but he definitely had a smell to his skin, no doubt about that. I did feel that and smell that rather. Um, and oh, Nasha also says it's not shock. It's more the feeling is real at times when you can't tell the difference between real and a dream. That's an interesting way
Yes.
to describe it. Yeah, that's a good way to
Yeah.
describe it.
Yeah.
Very good. So,
Awesome.
yeah.
Well, that's, when someone is in my life that has lost a loved one and is missing them and grieving them like right after, that's a
Hmm.
question that I often find myself asking is, have you dreamed about them yet?
Oh, yeah.
Because, I know that for me, it's been really comforting to dream of my father or my mother or some other loved one that's no longer with me, so
Right.
uh, it can be a wonderful thing.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, in my case, I had actually, it was a strange thing with my dad's passing because I did all of my grieving before he died. I didn't know you could do that. And so after he died and I just felt relief, it was strange. I wasn't sure how to handle it. I mean, it was great. I didn't have to go through any more grieving because I knew I'd gone through quite a bit before he had
Yeah.
died. But I just, it was backwards. It wasn't supposed to work in that order, right? But about a month and a half later, I mean, I passed the grieving process, but I still missed that he wasn't going to be around anymore, and that I just wasn't going to be able to talk to him.
Yeah.
And I thought, so it'd be really great to just, have another conversation with him. And within a week, I had that dream. So it was
That's
more cool
fantastic.
than anything else. It was just
Yeah.
fun.
Well,
It
and
was.
this is interesting that you talked about that, because listen what Neville says next. He says, this shock reverses your time sense. By this
Yeah.
is meant by this is meant that instead of your experience resulting from your past, it now becomes the result of being in imagination where you have not yet been physically.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
And that's
exactly what
kind of what
happened.
you did, right?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah,
That's exactly what I did. Yeah. That's why I laughed because here he is describing what my experience was.
right. In
Cool.
effect, this moves you across a bridge of incident to the physical realization of your imagined state. The man who at will can assume whatever state he pleases has found the keys to the kingdom of heaven. Now, he tells us what the keys are. The keys are desire, imagination, and a steadily focused attention on the feeling of the wish fulfilled.
Mm.
To such a man, any undesirable objective fact is no longer a reality, and the ardent wish is no longer a dream. I like
That
that,
describes that.
any undesirable objective fact,
Yeah. Oh,
that's
yeah. Yeah.
something
Yeah.
that
Right.
is, right.
Well, the way he describes that, it actually does a nice job of summarizing how it felt when I woke up from that dream. He says, to such a man, any undesirable objective fact is no longer a reality, and the ardent wish no longer a dream. And the sentence itself, if you read it out of context and you aren't familiar with what Neville has to say, the sentence itself has a little bit of confusion to it. And that's very similar to the confusion I had when I woke up because I didn't have any doubt that I had met my father. I was just confused about how did that happen?
Yeah.
How did that whole thing come about? It was just amazing to me that it could do that. And he kind of described it nicely in there. That was the feeling right there.
Yeah, he does that. So then he uses a scripture. It says, "Prove me now herewith, saith the Lord of hosts, if I will not open you the windows of heaven and pour you out a blessing that there shall not be room enough to receive it. He says the windows of heaven may not be opened and the treasures seized by a strong will, but they open of themselves and present their treasures as a free gift, a gift that comes when absorption reaches such a degree that it results in a feeling of complete acceptance. The passage from your present state to the feeling of your wish fulfilled is not across a gap. There is continuity between the so-called real and unreal. To cross from one state to the other, you simply extend your feelers, trust your touch, enter in fully into the spirit of what you are doing. Not by might nor by power, but by my spirit, says the Lord of hosts. Assume the spirit, the feeling of the wish fulfilled, and you will have opened the windows to receive the blessing. To assume a state is to get into the spirit of it. Your triumphs will be a surprise only to those who did not know your hidden passage from the state of longing to the assumption of the wish fulfilled. The Lord of hosts will not respond to your wish unless you have assumed the feeling of already being what you want to be, for acceptance is the channel of his action. Acceptance is the Lord of hosts in action.
And we should take a moment and put on the decoder ring and remind ourselves that any reference
Right.
to God or the Lord or whatever is the imagination.
Yes.
So when we reread that, we reread that.
Yeah,
Okay.
especially this last part, right? Because we talked about the idea of the word spirit. We talked
Hmm.
about this earlier. I'm not sure which podcast or if it was even this book, but it was Neville. And we
Hmm.
talked about spirit, like how we talk about the spirit of a thing, like
Hmm.
the Christmas spirit. Oh, you're sure in the Christmas spirit. Or we have a pep rally or spirit day at a school to get
Right.
team spirit going, right? So it's like an emotional thing. It's an energy. It's an alignment with something, an
Yes.
alignment with a goal. And so he talks about that, but here at the end where he says, if we break out the decoder ring and we use imagination, we'll read that imagination will not respond to your wish until you have assumed the feeling of already being what you want to be. For
Exactly.
acceptance is the channel of the action of the imagination.
Yeah. And boy, does that start to become clear when you say it that way.
Hmm? Acceptance is imagination in action. Mm. It's like
Yes.
there's movement there from,
Oh, big time.
yeah, from just assuming the feeling of the wish to causing some kind of movement towards it actually manifesting. And that movement is, the channel is acceptance,
So now
knowing we're already there.
if we combine that with what he said two paragraphs ago, where he talked about it being uh, things that we think of as being unconnected, but there's really no gap between the real and the unreal, between the imagined and the so-called reality.
Oh,
When we
yeah,
look at
good.
that, when we combine it with that, now all of a sudden we get the idea that imagination, when combined with acceptance, is what creates that nice, smooth connection.
Like
Like
a
no
bridge.
longer it's a bridge, but it's a bridge that is like of zero length because it doesn't really need to be a bridge. It's just it
Where
just
one
needs
meets the
to move
other.
us. Yeah, but it's just it's effortless. I think that's what I'm trying to get to. It's an effortless shift. There's no I mean calling it power is almost redundant because there's no need for power. You just got to move over there. That
I,
simple.
I love that. I love that you brought that up because I skipped that, and it affected me when I read it. The passage from your present state to the feeling of your wish fulfilled is not across a gap,
That's
and
right.
it kind of brings it home when he says it's already created. It's right here. There is no gap. It's right
Yeah.
here. There's a continuity between the so-called real and the unreal. That's pretty awesome. I also like that he says you simply extend your feelers.
Yes. The feelers. I like that.
Well, this chapter has
That,
been so powerful.
that's quite a great chapter for sure.
Let's see.
Had to be. It was called acceptance. How could it be otherwise?
I know. And you know what? We dove right in today, and I don't think we did any promos, so
Oh,
you
that's
might
true. We
want to
should get
do
our
them
promos
before we
in.
dive
Yeah, well, we're halfway through either way. But
in.
yeah, a few promos actually. First of all, if you're not a subscriber, become a subscriber, and very simple to do. The instructions are in the descriptions, most places where you can find the recording here. If you can't find it, go to the homepage, loatoday.net. Most importantly, be sure that you're sharing the fact that you're listening and or watching this particular podcast episode and all of the episodes each time that you listen or watch, because when you share, more and more people find out about it. And like I've been pointing out lately, that's likely how you found out. Somebody shared, somebody posted, somebody pointed out to you, hey, there's this thing going on. And so you're basically passing it along and helping other people find it. So please do share the fact that you found it, and share the joy, share the daily dose of happy. And we appreciate that you do that, and the listeners appreciate it because it keeps growing our audience, and we get more and more people participating in the live podcast, live streaming, and that makes it more fun. So yeah, just help us along. Give us that little push
Yes.
every time.
And thank you.
And thank you
Appreciate
very
it.
much.
Thank you. So the 14th chapter, the title is The Effortless Way. I
Makes
seem to
sense.
recall we were just speaking about letting it be easy.
Yeah.
The principle of least action governs everything in physics, from the path of a planet to the path of a pulse of light. Least action is the minimum of energy multiplied by the minimum of time. Hey, I like that, right?
That is good. Yeah.
Yeah. Therefore, in moving from your present state to the desired state, you must use the minimum of energy and take the shortest possible time. This sounds like how everyone wants everything to manifest. Easy
Yes,
peasy and right now.
exactly. It's also the way that most of us don't trust that it's actually going to manifest.
It's true. He says your journey from one state of consciousness to another is a psychological one. So to make the journey, you must employ the psychological equivalent of least action. And the psychological equivalent is mere assumption. The day you fully realize the power of assumption, you discover that it works in complete conformity with this principle. It works by means of attention minus effort. A lot
That's
of
exactly what
us
I've been
get caught
practicing.
up with the efforting.
I have really, I think that's what I was trying to talk about earlier, about making it easy. I'm trying to really buy into and learn and apply every single day, no effort. And it's a challenge, especially for somebody like me who's been a doer all of his life.
Right.
But I just, I think I'm feeling it in a way that I never felt before. I'm feeling how important it is to just do it effortlessly. Just put the assumption in it and let the universe do its work.
You know, when we ask ourselves the question about what things do we do where we lose track of time, I think most of those things are things that are effortless or maybe fall into that category.
Hmm. Okay.
Because a lot of times when we're really enjoying something, like even
Yeah.
if it's just sinking down in a comfortable chair with a really good book that you're reading, and all of a sudden, whoa, 2 hours has passed by. I mean, that never feels like there's any effort. Just
It's true.
easy. I know.
And I also remind myself too when I'm trying to go for effortless, it's not like I never want to do anything.
Right.
The
It's not.
time
I was just going to say, do you think that effort and action? I mean, I think they're different
they
because
are different.
inspired action doesn't feel like effort.
Yeah, I think the way I'd express it is historically I've always felt like I had to do in order to get somewhere. And what I'm trying to learn now is to assume that I'm going to get to wherever it is I want to get to. It's just going to happen, so I can take all that effort away and limit the. I'm not even sure the word limit is appropriate, but limit the activity of doing to just the part that I like doing because I like doing it, and not even worrying about whether or not it's going to contribute to anything. I do it just for the sake of doing it because I enjoy it so much.
Right. Well, it's like Neville used, he talked about physics and a beam of light, but I mean, think about water running down, a path. It takes the path of least resistance. It goes around the
Hmm.
rocks or, whatever. It doesn't struggle,
Yeah.
right? And,
The,
and
the,
I
pla-
think
the idea
that's it,
the idea of the path of the planets, that was a good description too. I mean, it's not
right?
like the planets say, okay, I got to get around this orbit one more time.
Right. So it's just letting it be easy and least resistance, or he says least action.
Hmm.
Um, Thus, with least action, through an assumption, you hurry without haste and reach your goal without effort.
Hmm.
Because creation is finished. What you desire already exists. Oh, that's so exciting. It is excluded from view because you can see only the contents of your own consciousness. It is the function of an assumption to call back the excluded view and restore full vision. It is not the world, but your assumptions that change. An assumption brings the invisible into sight. It's nothing more nor less than seeing with the eye of God, or imagination. For the Lord sees not as a man sees, for man looks on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart. Okay, so again, Neville is using Lord, God, Christ in you always as the imagination.
Right.
So our imagination doesn't see the same way a human sees. Humans look on what we think is real, right? On the outward,
Right.
but our imagination looks at the inside, looks at the heart.
Yes. It's an
The
inside
heart,
job.
pardon?
It's an inside job.
No, it's always an inside job. It
Yeah.
is an inside job. The heart is the primary organ of sense, hence the first cause of experience. When you look on the heart, you are looking at your assumptions. Assumptions determine your experience. Now, I like this. I think this is a paraphrase. Um, Watch your assumption with all diligence, for out of it are the issues of life. That's actually the Bible verse is actually um, to watch your heart with all diligence.
Oh,
So he's doing a little of his own Neville decoding here.
yeah. Hmm.
Watch your assumption with all diligence, for out of it are the issues of life. Assumptions have the power of objective realization. Every event in the visible world is the result of an assumption or idea in the unseen world. The
Funny
present
thing,
moment,
we talk about this kind of thing all the time. We talk
yep,
about the impact that our thoughts have in advance of events, created things, attracting stuff into our lives, and so on and so forth.
yep,
And I find that as we do that continuously, day after day, week after week, my belief in it increases. And this is where the Neville teaching about it, the belief hardening, it starts to
yes,
become real for me because
yeah,
I can feel the hardening going on. I mean, it's gotten to the point now where, like, if I compare this to where I was at, say, I don't know, 5 years ago, like halfway through compared to where I am now, halfway through my exploration of how the law of attraction works, I would have said that the hardened aspect of my belief in the thought process coming before the actual thing was 10%, maybe 15%. Now I'm
mm,
closer to like 85, 90%.
yay.
The
Well,
hardening has really taken place. It's gotten to the point where it's just a real part of my thought process now.
remember this morning on the podcast when we were reading the part that talked about, or I don't know if we were reading it or you were commenting, but the idea that when you look around and you see what you're experiencing right now, it's not a result of the thoughts you're having right now.
Right.
It's a result of the thoughts that you had previously.
Or, yes.
And we were talking about how often we have certain thoughts, certain assumptions, and eventually they harden into fact. They may not be things that we're consciously trying to create. They may not be things that we're happy about. But how often we forget. We forget the thoughts that created these things because of that time gap. And I think it's important that Neville says here, watch your assumption with all diligence. Because I think that that's what happens. We're not diligent to be, I mean, the book, Power of Awareness.
Yeah.
We often aren't aware of how powerful our words are, how powerful our thoughts are, how powerful our story is. And so that's why sometimes things happen and we don't think they're connected to our thoughts or our story because it was past. We do a little digging and we can see the connection. But he says to be diligent about what we're thinking about our story. Then we'll start to see it. And of course, like you said, the easier it becomes for us to do this, the faster we see the manifestation. Then we don't claim that we forgot because it's fast.
Yeah, and I like the idea of using diligence as a word. I think diligence is a great way to describe how important it is to just stick to it. Because, as an example, in the new Pivot Palace group, I posted a post earlier this morning before we did our morning podcast, in which I laid out my old story and my new story. The old story about the things I've been looking for in my life, and then the new story, which is my newly imagined pruning shears of revision. Here's the way I really want it to be. Here's the way I really need to think about it approach. And I had like 4 different areas of my life I touched on. And at the end of each area, I took our idea of a vignette. I included my vignette for each one of those areas.
Oh, nice.
And it is nice. But here's the interesting thing where diligence is concerned, because I haven't revisited that post since I posted it this morning. And you know what? I can't tell you what any one of those vignettes are because I haven't been diligent yet. I haven't stuck to it. I haven't been focused. I haven't been going back to it over and over and over again, which I will now do, especially after this.
Well,
But
okay, so this is a great example because think about this. You posted the vignette this morning and you can't remember what it is right now.
Right.
So if you never looked at it again and that vignette happens 2 months from now, you might not even connect it.
Exactly.
Right? I mean, you might also have
tomorrow.
that. Oh my goodness.
I might forget about it by tomorrow, let alone 2 months from now.
That's a good point. So when we become diligent and we start practicing and we get that focused attention going, then when it unfolds, it's a powerful miracle.
Mm-hmm. Really
Let's
is.
see where okay, so Neville says, watch your assumption with all diligence, for out of it are the issues of life. Assumptions have the power of objective realization. Every event in the visible world is the result of an assumption or an idea in the unseen world. The present moment is all important, for it is the only in the present moment that our assumptions can be controlled. The future must become the present in your mind if you would wisely operate the law of assumption. The future becomes the present when you imagine that you already are what you will be when your assumption is fulfilled. Be still, least action, and know that you are that which you desire to be. The end of longing should be being. Translate your dream into being. Perpetual construction of future states without the consciousness of already being them, that is, picturing your desire without actually assuming the feeling of the wish fulfilled, is the fallacy and mirage of mankind. It is simply futile daydreaming. Now here's what comes to mind for me, that the end of longing should be being, not having, not doing. And it doesn't mean that having and doing won't be in there, but it's my being. I am the person that does XYZ. I am the person that has XYZ. It's who I am being. It's an identity thing again.
Yeah, you're going back to identity. That's what you're saying. And yeah, identity is a big part of it, because if you are imagining from the perspective of identity, you're making it more real for you.
Yes. Yeah. And it's, he says the end of longing. So if I'm longing for something and then I receive that thing, I'm a different person, because now I'm the owner of whatever it is.
Mhm.
And
It gives
that's the part that we have to tap into. It's the being part. It's the identity part. The I am story. I am the person that has already had this experience.
this idea of being gives a new flavor and a new shape and texture to the idea of abundance. Because we all are after abundance, right? That's like
Sure.
the one most popular way to summarize all this. I want to live
Right.
an abundant life.
Right.
And I'll be willing to bet 9 times out of 10 when we say I want to live an abundant life, the one thing that's sticking out in everybody's mind is the word abundant. And the word I is like this little tiny I at the beginning of
Ah,
the sentence.
right. Right. Yeah, because it's being pictured somewhere out there,
Yeah.
apart from
But as
me, apart from the
but as
I.
he points out, it has to be the being part, the I part has to be the biggest part. The
Right.
abundant is actually it's almost secondary at that point.
And until you can accept it as true.
Hmm. Yep.
Yeah.
Very good. Good
Nice
stuff. Really
catch.
good.
Can you believe that we've finished 2 chapters?
Not only can I believe it, but we actually have time to do chapter 15, so let's go through that one too.
I know. It's exciting. All right. So the title of the 15th chapter is The Crown of the Mysteries. I
Hmm.
wish I had my tiara that I wore for my wedding sitting here. I would just
We'll just pretend that you got it. We will imagine it.
yes. Excellent. The assumption of the wish fulfilled is the ship that carries you over the unknown seas to the fulfillment of your dream. The assumption is everything. Realization is subconscious and effortless. Assume a virtue if you have it not. William Shakespeare. Act on the assumption that you already possess that which you sought. Blessed is she that believed, for there shall be a performance of those things which were told her from the Lord. Now, I'm
It's
not
almost
sure the
shocking.
context of that scripture. So we're
But
just
it's
going to
almost
say,
shocking. He actually used the female pronoun in that.
right.
He doesn't do that. It's like, what happened? I don't understand. This is great, but what happened?
Well, because usually he's pointing uh, to he because he's talking about Christ or the Lord, Jesus, God, always using that male pronoun. But right here, he's talking about somebody that was healed and healed because of her belief. So he says, blessed is she that believed. But let's do the Neville thing and do the imagination. Blessed is she that believed, for there shall be a manifestation of those things that were told her by her imagination.
Well, okay, let's take the Neville decoder ring a step further because I don't
Oh, here he
remember.
is. That's a different story. He's actually talking about the Immaculate Conception.
Okay, well, that still works with where I was going because
Okay.
there was a previous chapter. I'm not even sure if it was this book. It may have been a different book, but he was talking about the metaphor of male and female as conscious and
Yes,
subconscious.
this book.
And sub, was it this book? Okay.
I think
And
so. If it
subconscious
wasn't,
was
it was out of
female.
this world. Right.
Yeah.
He the conscious being male, the subconscious being female. The two of them are actually one, and the conscious plants the seed, the subconscious creates.
So if we do a little substitution, blessed is the subconscious that believed, for there shall be a performance of those things which were told the subconscious from the imagination.
Yes. Oh, so he says, as the Immaculate Conception is the foundation of the Christian mysteries, so the Assumption is their crown. Psychologically, the Immaculate Conception means the birth of an idea in your own consciousness, unaided by another. Got it. For instance,
Okay.
when you have a specific wish or hunger or longing, it is an immaculate conception in the sense that no physical person or thing plants it in your mind. It is self-conceived. Every man is the Mary of the Immaculate Conception, and birth to his idea must give. The assumption is the crown of the mysteries because it's the highest use of consciousness. When in imagination you assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled, you are mentally lifted up to a higher level. Do you sense that personally?
It's what it's what I aspire to. I would say that when I'm not feeling that, which is often, I know it. I'm aware of it. And I notice the lack. I notice the part that's missing, the part that I haven't quite achieved yet.
Because when I hear that, I just think of vibration
Hmm.
and vibrational alignment and the emotional scale. I mean, it's
Yeah.
nothing like hard to put our hands on, but it's like when I go into that place where I am assuming the feeling of the wish fulfilled, where I'm closing my eyes and I'm imagining this short vignette that I've created of what I want to see happen in the future, I definitely get a sense of my moving up the emotional ladder, so to speak. A
Sure.
higher
Oh, yeah.
vibration, feeling better. It feels really good to go
Hmm.
there. And we talked about that before, that should be our aim, is
Hmm.
actually getting to the place where that imagination feels really good, because it not only feels really good, it feels real.
Right. Right.
I think that's why our brain reads it as feeling good. We
Yeah.
believe it, right?
And it's
Because
also why when I'm not quite getting there, I'm not quite um, latching onto the feeling portion. I notice the lack because that
yep,
feeling, I'm almost addicted to it. It's like I got to have that feeling.
yes, and I think it's so funny because sometimes it's so easy to get there, and sometimes it's not. For
It's
me,
true.
personally, I mean, I can only
Well, me
speak to my
too.
own experience, but sometimes I'm like, why, you know, why is it so easy sometimes? But I think here we go with just let it be easy.
Hmm. Yeah, and
It's like,
also we recognize the fact that it isn't always emotional feeling. It can be sensational
yeah,
too. I
yeah,
mean,
yeah.
when we remember that, that actually often makes it easier to get there sometimes.
Well, and I
But
think
there,
that's the part that feels shocking when you come back.
oh, okay, yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's true
In other words,
because
here's
that's
a
the
really
physical
simple
part.
example. In my office, I have a big chair that I often sit in to imagine and meditate, and there's an ottoman there.
Hmm.
So I will often sit in that chair and my feet are up on the
Hmm.
ottoman.
Right.
But in the vignette that I've been doing, I'm actually in a scene where I'm sitting at a table and my feet are flat on the floor. So physically in this world, if you were to walk in my office, you would see me in a chair with my feet up. But in my
Hmm.
imagination, I am in a chair with my feet flat on the floor. I can feel my feet on the floor. I can feel myself in the chair. I can feel my hands on the tablecloth. I can feel the tablecloth under my fingers. When I come out of that, a little bit of a shock that my feet are up. See, there's no emotion attached. Not really an
Hmm.
emotional thing. I think that's so important because the emotion's hard to tap into sometimes. For me anyway.
Let's also touch another aspect of this too, because I ran into this in a big way. I think was it yesterday? No, it wasn't yesterday. It was last week when I was when Louise and I were dealing with her medical issue. Because there was the one day right after we got what we thought was really bad news, and it turned out to be inaccurate, um, where my passion for resolving it just shot through the roof. I didn't have to reach for it. I didn't have to do anything. It was just there, big, in spades.
Yes.
And it kind of reinforced for me that emotion is there not only to indicate what I want and how I feel about it, but to indicate what is really important to me. Because we were
Yes.
talking about a situation that was really important to me. It was my wife's health.
Right.
That was really, really important to me. And so there was no reaching for it at all. And it was important to me in a way that I don't have to project it into the future in any way. I don't have to create a vignette in order to have that importance. It's important right now. It was important yesterday. It was important last year. It's been important
Right.
for a long, long time.
And anytime that we have a strong emotion, um, especially if it's an uncomfortable emotion, because usually if we have a strong emotion that's wonderful, we don't worry about processing it, right?
Sure.
We just enjoy it, right? Yeah, this is great.
Absolutely. Yeah. Woohoo!
But anytime we have a fear, a worry, a frustration, anger, guilt, anything that we have, and it's a strong emotion, always remember that if we ask ourselves what value we hold so dear that this is connected to, that is a really great trick to help transmute that emotion. So in other words, you just said it, like you had this passionate response of, no, we are going to fix this. We're going to turn this around. Why was there so much passion and so much fury and fierceness about it? Because you have a really strong value around your wife's health.
Mm-hmm.
It's important to you.
Very.
And once you recognize that, for me anyway, it alleviates some of the part of the charge that doesn't feel so good. And it brings some inspiration. It's like, this is the thing I value. I care about this. This is important. You know, this is going to happen.
Oh yeah, all of a sudden when I was feeling that, all of a sudden it was like every sense was alive. I mean, all you talk about feelers, all of my feelers were out. I was looking for any clue anywhere that I could find one. I was not going to miss it.
Well, you see, you're on the right track, because Neville said, just extend your feelers. So Neville says, when through your persistence, this assumption becomes actual fact, you automatically find yourself on a higher level. That is, you've achieved your desire in your objective world. Your assumption guides all your conscious and subconscious movements towards its suggested end. So inevitably, that it actually dictates the events. So this is going back to what you mentioned before about the subconscious doing the creation. Actually dictating events.
Right.
The drama of life is a psychological one, and the whole of it is written and produced by your assumptions. Learn the art of assumption, for only in this way can you create your own happiness.
Why do you think he calls this chapter the crown of the mysteries, though?
Well, because he says that the Immaculate Conception was the mystery of the Christian religion. And so he says, if that is true, then the Assumption is the crown. It's the crowning thing, right? It's the ability to assume the feeling of the wish, the ability to accept these things as truth already. And he talks about the ability to come up with these ideas on our own. Like, no one is planting these desires in our head. We're doing that.
Right.
So it's something we've done unaided.
It's funny because when you first see that title for the chapter, it almost sounds like it's some sort of it is a mystical thing. The guy is a self-described mystic, but it has this like magical quality, like, oh, the crown of the mysteries. I wonder what that's all about.
I have to say, I got a little excited when I saw the title.
Well, good. That's funny.
It didn't turn out to be what I thought it was going to be, but that's okay. That's okay, because the main thing is recognizing that the key, Neville says the key is desire and then assumption and that focused attention.
Right.
The focus, this is the key. The key is to stay with it and keep going and believe it.
You mentioned at the beginning of this particular episode that he does repeat himself a lot, and that it's good to have the repetition. It helps kind of bring it home, so to speak. And it's true, it does. The thing that I'm finding fascinating, though, is that he is not just repetitive. He's repetitive about one particular thing. One thing. It's the same thing over and over and over again. And I'm not sure what to make of that.
3 times a day, my phone gives me a little reminder. It says, assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled.
Yeah. Same thing every single time. It's always worded differently. It comes at it from different angles and so forth. But it's always the same thing. It's almost Abraham-like. Abraham saying, we're happy to answer all of your questions just so as long as you know that it's always the same answer.
It's always the same answer. Well, so I think that it's very meta, because I think in the same way that Neville is repeating this over and over, it's a good practice for us to repeat doing it over and over, to repeat our practice over and over. You know that old practice makes perfect thing? Well, in this sense, practice may make the manifestation happen. I mean, just
Well,
staying
exactly.
with it, letting it get
That's
stronger,
exactly it.
believing
So
it.
essentially what we're doing is we are taking the pattern that he presents to us of repeating it over and over again as a way to repeat over and over again to ourselves. My thoughts become things. What I'm focusing on in advance is my tomorrow. What I'm experiencing today is what I thought about yesterday, and just continuously drilling that in. That's why I went from 10% belief to 85 to 90% belief, and I'm closing in on 100%.
At that point, we'll have 100,000 listeners.
Wow. Okay, I have even more motivation. Because that's my biggest dream where the podcast is concerned, for
Right?
sure. Huge
So
numbers
it's
of
going to harden
listeners.
into fact.
I'm still trying to imagine how some of that could play out. Like what happens? I mean, we get when we do these podcasts live stream to the Law of Attraction Changed My Life group on Facebook that we live stream to each time now. We get people tuning in live and they're making comments and liking and sharing ideas with each other and so forth. And yet it's still relatively small scale. I mean, it's nowhere near 100,000. We're talking in tens or twenties of people who are listening and interacting. What happens when you get that happening with 100,000? I mean, I don't even know how you even detect that other than you have this swarm of data that's flowing past your screen. You can't possibly keep up with it all.
Well, are you ready to find out?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, okay.
But I'm just trying to imagine that. I mean, it's a good thing we have computers that can capture data faster than we can possibly do it with our
Right,
human brains, because otherwise I'd be in trouble.
exactly. It's going to
Oh,
be
that's
good.
great. Well,
I'm
it's been
ready.
great, and we covered a lot. We do 3 shows a week, you and I. We covered a lot in those 3 shows this week, but
We did.
I think we're going to have to see. Do we even go faster than that next week? I don't know. We may finish the book next week. It's always possible.
Maybe.
Anyway, I'm looking forward to it, and I look forward to talking to you then. I hope you have a great week.
I hope you do too. I'll be back on Tuesday morning.
Sounds good. And we'll see you all next time here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Don't forget the market. All right. And say goodbye to our friends on Facebook.